Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation. Given the rise in hate crimes across this country, it is critical that members of law enforcement work with our legislators as well as our community leaders to not only condemn hate crimes, as well as the recent targeting of our Asian American Pacific Islander community, but it is also important to take action to prevent hate crimes, to assist victims of hate crimes, and to hold those people accountable who commit these hate crimes to the fullest extent that we can under the law. As District Attorney of Sacramento County, let me be very clear. Hate crimes committed against a member of any group in our community will not be tolerated, and offenders will be held accountable and face aggressive prosecution. But beyond prosecution, I thought it was also important to do what we call a Zoomcast on hate crimes to help educate the community on this increasing public safety issue. I'm pleased to have special guests, California Assemblyman Jim Cooper, Executive Director Stephanie Nguyen of Asian Resources, Inc., join our Assistant Chief Deputy District Attorney Thienvu Ho here today to discuss how the DA's Hate Crimes Unit is working to hold offenders accountable, as well as propose new legislation to strengthen hate crimes laws and the current impact on our AAPI community and the resources available to them. I hope you find this Zoomcast informative, and I ask that you share this discussion with your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your community.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Justice Journal podcast. I am your host, Supervising Deputy District Attorney Rochelle Beardsley. Today, we are going to be discussing the troubling rise in hate crimes. According to the FBI, hate crimes in our country rose to their highest numbers in a decade, and the offenses are becoming more and more violent. Most recently, hate incidents against the Asian Pacific Islander community has seen an increase, especially in large cities. According to the Asian Bar Association of New York, across the country, there were more than 2,500 reports of anti-Asian hate incidents related to COVID-19 between March and September of 2020. To talk about this huge public safety issue, we are joined by our special guests, Assemblyman Jim Cooper. Hello.
Hello.
And Executive Director Stephanie Nguyen from Sacramento's Asian Resources Incorporated. Hello, Stephanie.
Hi.
As well as our very own Assistant Chief Deputy District Attorney, Thienvu Ho. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
Can I have each one of you introduce yourselves and include a brief history of your background and your current roles?
Sure. Jim Cooper, lifelong Sacramento resident. I was elected in 2014 to the Assembly. I represent the 9th Assembly District, so South Sacramento, Elk Grove, Galt, and Lodi. Prior to that, I was the first mayor of Elk Grove and spent 15 years in the city council. And during those 15 years, I spent 30 years with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. I was a captain, and I pretty much managed every division as a division commander within the department. And spent about a third of my career in narcotics and gangs.
Great, thank you so much. Stephanie, why don't you introduce yourself and give us some information on your background?
Certainly. My name is Stephanie Nguyen. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Resources. We're a nonprofit organization that has been around for over 40 years now, serving our immigrant and refugee communities. We've got 3 locations, one in South Sacramento, one in Oak Park, and one in Citrus Heights. My family fled the Vietnam War in 1975 during the fall of Saigon. And so I am a daughter of refugee parents. And as we're talking about the hate crimes against our AAPI community, this truly hits home for me, everything that we have going on right now. I grew up in South Sacramento, a family with 5 other siblings. I'm the oldest daughter in the family, which means that I have to take the lead as the mother in charge. But as the oldest daughter in the family, it also comes with lots and lots and lots of expectations, high expectations. So coming from a traditional Catholic family, Asian background means all the things that you know so true to be about the Asian community is what I live. I'm very fortunate to be able to run an organization that serves the community in which my parents came and struggled with all of the barriers as newcomers, as refugees, as folks that didn't speak the English language. I'm also proud to say that I'm the very first Southeast Asian City Council member for the city of Elk Grove.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Thien, can we have you introduce yourself?
Definitely. So let me give you some background information. When I was 4 years old, my family, my parents and I escaped Vietnam by way of a fishing boat. So I am a political refugee as well. I've lived in California since that point in time, since I was 4 years old and we came here. English was my second language. We grew up in an immigrant community, both in Stockton and in San Jose as well. Currently, I am the Assistant Chief Deputy District Attorney, and I oversee our community outreach, our community prosecution, our post-conviction integrity unit. And I also previously have personally prosecuted the East Area Rapist, or the Golden State Killer, who's very notorious throughout the state. But one of the assignments that I held was I was the supervisor of our gang and hate crime unit at the district attorney's office. And that has I have a particular affinity to that because I have, personally experienced hate incidents as well growing up and even as an adult. And so what is happening in our communities, what is happening throughout our country, it resonates with me as well. And so thank you for having me here on this podcast.
Thank you very much. I want to get right to it. I want to start talking about hate crimes, and we can start with Thien. Thien, can you talk to us about hate crimes? Tell us what a hate crime is and how it differs from a hate incident.
Definitely. The California Penal Code, specifically Section 422.55, it defines what a hate crime is and what it isn't. And so in California, when you use physical force or you threaten somebody with physical force because of a bias that you have, that is a misdemeanor. If you commit vandalism or you destroy property, and that value of that property is under $950, and it's based upon a bias motive that you have for committing that crime, that's a misdemeanor. And it can be upgraded to a felony if you've had a prior conviction where the damage is more than $950, or if you have actual injury that has occurred. That's the basic gist of what a hate crime is in California. And the key to convicting somebody and charging somebody with hate crime is really the intent. What was their intent? What was in their mind when they committed that crime? And did they have a bias motive? In California, we have certain classes that are protected. Race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, and religion are some of those protected classes. Now, what is a hate incident? A hate incident, and the best way is to give you an example. A couple weeks ago, my 16-year-old niece with her friend, who is also Asian, they were walking down the street in Folsom when a vehicle pulled up next to them, and a man came out and he asked them, "What ethnicity are you?" And she looked at him, and she's 16, and she says, "Well, I'm Vietnamese." To which the gentleman, the man said, "Well, because of you and because of the virus, my children's lives have been ruined." All right. And he was yelling at her. Now, clearly, that is a hate incident, but he didn't make a threat towards her. He didn't use violence towards her. She wasn't physically injured. He didn't deface or destroy any property. So that is not a hate crime, but it is a hate incident. It could be elevated to a hate crime if, the man repeatedly did that over several days, if he blocked her movement, if he used any sort of physical force. So we look at a lot of the circumstances behind that to determine whether or not it is a hate crime versus a hate incident. Okay. And that's sort of the difference between the two.
Well, thanks for that clarification. You told us when you were discussing your background that you were the supervisor of the gangs and hate crime unit. Can you tell us a little bit more about the unit? And do they only prosecute felony crimes?
So the unit is comprised of anywhere between 5 and 6 attorneys. And these attorneys in our office, they have been specially trained and are very experienced attorneys. They've been attorneys. They have been an attorney for at least 10 years in that unit. They prosecute gang cases. They prosecute hate crime cases. And so we put some of our most experienced attorneys in that unit that are able to identify, to charge, and to prosecute these sort of specialized cases. They are the best of the best among the attorneys in the office. So we have a unit that's dedicated to that. And they prosecute both misdemeanor and felony hate crimes. And hate crimes, right now, the way the law is written, it is very difficult sometimes to be able to prove the case. And even when you prove the case is a felony, sometimes the penalty doesn't really reflect the danger and the harm that it does to society. And I know at some point today, I think Assemblyman Jim Cooper would talk about a particular piece of legislation he's proposed. And he's somebody, along with Stephanie as well, who used their platform as public figures, as legislatures, in order to really combat and deal with hate crime. And so I have to really commend both of them for what they continue to do to help end hate crime.
Well, let's talk a little bit about numbers. We've heard about increased numbers involving hate crimes across the country. What are we seeing in Sacramento as far as cases that are filed?
So let me talk about that real quick. I know you threw out a statistic there, which is about 2,800 hate incidents that have occurred nationally over the last year. I would also note that there's been a 150% increase in hate crimes committed towards Asian American Pacific Islander. And not only that, there was a recent survey by USA Today that indicated 1 out of 4 Americans in recent weeks have personally seen somebody blame an Asian for the pandemic. That's 1 in 4. That's 25% of America has witnessed that in the last several weeks. In terms of what we've seen in Sacramento, the numbers in terms of hate crimes being committed in Sacramento have not increased. But I want to caution for a moment here that those numbers do not reflect what is happening in our community. We know that based upon statistics, upon conversations with our partners in the community, with our community members, that the incidence of hate incident and hate crime is greatly underreported in the Asian community. And I think Stephanie can probably address that, why that is. And there's a whole list of reasons for why we believe it's underreported. But that's one of the things that we need to really address in our community.
Thank you for that. I want to open it up for the rest of the panel. And Stephanie, if you could jump in here too. Can you give us your thoughts on that? And then I want your thoughts on our local hate crime numbers.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What Thien is talking about is exactly right. The numbers are not accurate, and the numbers are not accurate because when there is a hate crime incident or a hate crime that has occurred against somebody that is of immigrants, right? English is a second language. We came over here fearful of the government already as it is, most fearful of retaliation, right? Retaliation is the one thing that we're most fearful of. Also, the other thing is that if you're on any type of public assistance, you're fearful that if you report the incident, that your public assistance is going to get taken away from you. I can tell you that as the executive director of a nonprofit organization that serves the immigrants Asian community here, right in the heart of Little Saigon, we get folks coming in and telling us stories every single day about being harassed, about being spat on, about being yelled at, about all of that, and asking them to report it, asking them to talk about it, asking them to do something about it. They're fearful. They're fearful for retaliation. They're fear that somebody may figure out it was them. They're fearful that they may then open up a whole nother can of worms that they don't want to open up, right? They're fearful that this may somehow impact them and their family. And as an traditional Asian American women, we were always taught to keep our head down, not making any noises, and just go with the way things are. My parents always told me to just look the other way. Who cares? Which means who cares? Just let them say what they say, and you just take care of your own business. That is very common in the Vietnamese community. That is very common in your immigrant Asian community because we don't make waves. We don't speak out. And so that's why it's so important now that there is this push to speak out. I'm going to let Assemblymember Cooper chime in, and then I'll be able to chime in if there's more.
I'll just say ditto what Stephanie said. I think she did it all, and the numbers are vastly underreported. We really don't know. We know it's out there. Folks are afraid right now. It's been going on for quite some time nationally. You see it on the news every night, and you hear more and more stories. That's really the tip of the iceberg. And the underreporting, I mean, we have no idea. It's probably double or triple that, the numbers. So it's an unfortunate set of circumstances.
And because of the way we were raised to not fight back, to not speak up, to just be that individual that an easy target. That's why we've always been an easy target since we've been here. It's not until most recently that there's been more attention towards the Asian community and the attacks on the Asian American community and Pacific Islander communities, but it is definitely still underreported. As Thien mentioned earlier, there's been 150% increase, but I believe, and I know to be true, that there's a lot more than that. It's just we're slowly starting to get used to reporting it. Not everybody is reporting it.
And the reporting aspect is very, very important. Can someone speak to how important it is for those folks in our community to say something if something occurs and report it to law enforcement?
Well, I think go ahead, Tim. Tim, go ahead.
What I can say is if you don't report it, law enforcement is never going to hear about it. And if not, law enforcement never hears about it, never investigate it, we're never from the district attorney's office ever able to even prosecute it because we won't know about it. And the only way to end this is one, education, and the other thing is prosecution, because you have to show that there is a consequence for hate, right? Because people may not, unless they're educated and they suddenly are no longer intolerant, the system of justice that we have in place needs to say that there are consequences if you are going to infringe upon somebody else's constitutional right. Right. And I know that, before Assemblyman Cooper was in his current spot, he's a longtime law enforcement officer. So I think he can speak to that and many other aspects. And I'll turn it over to him.
I think Tim said it best. Right now, there's no consequence in California for a lot of things, specifically hate. So people know that doing these things, they aren't going to be held accountable. And I agree, education and consequences have to be there. And there's no accountability until that changes. It's unfortunate and it's frustrating because the victims are out there. We've been through this before back in the 80s and 90s with the home invasion robberies, and folks were afraid to speak up and speak out. And we've got to change that where people have to protect themselves. But I guess it's unfortunate, but seeing more and more stories on the news, hopefully that encourages people to report it. And it's making people more aware of it too. So, hopefully through some bad will come some good.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Cooper mentioned that in the 80s there were home invasion and robberies. I can tell you that it happened in my family, in my home, and we never reported it because we feared retaliatory. We feared them coming back and retaliating against the family, right? So, and I know that it happened to several other families in the community as well too, but we all believed it. And what I've learned is that if you don't report it, it never happened, is what both Assemblymember Cooper and Thien has said. And we're trying to educate our community on the importance of reporting it, and that if you don't report it, it never happened, then there's nothing that can be done about it. I will say that we're doing a Drive Out the Hate event here on Stockton Boulevard this weekend, and there is a little bit of pushback. There's a little bit of pushback from some of the community members because they're afraid that this is going to somehow backfire on them, somehow open it up to where more individuals will come in and retaliate, right? As I mentioned earlier, retaliation is huge in our community, and that's one of the biggest fear that we have. And so there is a little bit of a pushback, and I'm having to meet with them and educate them and encourage them that we need to bring awareness to this. And unless we do this, we're going to continue to be the target.
Thank you. Let me focus this next question on our electeds. I want to know what you're hearing from your AAPI constituents and community members. And can you talk about the fear, the level of fear?
The fear is real. If people are concerned, especially you see the assaults on the elderly, and in the Asian community, I don't need to tell you that. Their elders are very revered. And that's so disheartening to see that. And they're afraid. They're truly afraid to go out, to go shopping. And they don't want to be attacked. And we've got to make them feel safe and secure. And, we had a news conference today down in Elk Grove, and it was good to talk about it and get it out there and let them know it's okay to be afraid, but we want to help them. But it's palpable what is going on here. And every night you turn the TV on, there's another case that happens. And when is it going to stop? And it keeps coming back, having spent time in the legislature and in law enforcement, there has to be a consequence. It's not okay. If you're going to do this, then you're going to have repercussions. Otherwise, if they're left to do it, they're going to continue doing it over and over and over again. And that's really the big issue.
Right. Yes, Assemblymember Cooper's right. The community is very fearful. We open our office at 8 o'clock and our doors are completely impacted and busy because they want to come here as early as they can to get as much done as they can because they're afraid as it gets later in the day, something may happen to them. And sometimes if they're going to go shopping, they want to make sure that there's quite a few people inside the parking center or the parking area that they can walk in with so they're in groups and not going out by themselves. And so unless we can do things like what Assemblymember Cooper says is that there are going to be consequences if things like this continue to happen. If there are no consequences, we're not going to see this end at all.
You know,
Can you
I
talk
want to
about
talk. I do want to address something. There is both the physical injury that occurs when a crime is committed, but more than the physical injury, what's left behind are the psychological scars, right? And the trauma that comes with it. You know, my mom's in her early 80s, and before the pandemic started, she was shopping at a little grocery store in East San Jose, a Vietnamese store, a grocery store, and there was a robbery there. And in the process of that robbery, the suspect ran my mom over, knocked her down, and she had stitches on the top of her head, right? And those stitches healed. The wounds healed, but she was afraid to go out to the grocery store. She was afraid to go outside for a period of time where my dad had to go with her. My brother, who still lives there, had to accompany her and take her out. And so what you have here, and that's why when you have a hate crime or a hate incident, they're targeting you, not because of something that you did, but because of the color of your skin, where you came from, who you are, things that you can't change. And the mark that it leaves on a person, right? It goes deeper than just the physical scars. And so there needs to be a consequence. There needs to be education. And so this is really something that impacts an entire community when you think about it.
And I want to talk about that, how the entire community is impacted. Can you give me your thoughts, panel, about how the community at large has been impacted by this and how the community at large is responding?
So I could say that after the incident that has happened, I mean, let's go back to the pandemic when Thien was talking about his niece and what she's going through, what she had gone through. And I can tell you that when that pandemic hit, a lot of our businesses in the Little Saigon area, a lot of the businesses that were ran or owned by Asians were impacted by it, right? Because the word on the street is that if you go and eat at an Asian business or shop at an Asian establishment, you're going to catch the virus. And so we already saw that at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so this only made it worse, right? It made it worse because you had folks that not only were already targeting us, but now they're blaming us because of this pandemic. What I've seen in the last couple of weeks is that there's been an idea of unity, right? All of us coming together, even more so after the murder that happened in Atlanta, Georgia, of the women, and that all of the communities coming together, and not just the communities, but our local law enforcement agencies as well, too, is that we all come together and we all unify and we all fight this together. And so on the community standpoint, I could say that we're pushing this idea of unity, that we can't divide ourselves up and we can't divide each other up, and that we need to combat this by all coming together and saying what it is and calling out what it is and helping each other out.
What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
I think Stephanie said it best, and that it just goes to it's just troubling. We talk about it, and coming from law enforcement, we want to get things done, and it's like I said, it's just when you talk to people, your heart aches for them, and it's got to stop. But united we stand, so we're much stronger standing together.
One thing I would also add is this, and we always have to also leave with a message of hope, right? And that's the beautiful thing about this country. There is such a hope and a brightness that comes with this country. And what I've seen here is that these incidents have truly galvanized not only the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but other communities as well, to stand up, to speak out, and to stop the hate, right, across all different sectors of American society. And so what I see are people coming together. What I see are people standing up together. What I see are people speaking out together. And there's been a real galvanization and movement here. And so that is really a message of hope, maybe something positive that comes out from this.
Before we move on to the great work that's being done in in the assembly and locally. As Asian Americans, what are your thoughts on this increasing concern of the anti-Asian sentiment and violence?
You know, as mentioned earlier, that we've always been a target, right? We've always been a target, and as more and more folks are speaking out about it, as more and more videos surface, as more and more people are willing to report, right? Then my fear, though, is that there may be more that's going to come out of that as well. That unless we do something about it, as what Assemblymember Cooper was talking about his bill and having consequences, if folks don't think that there are any consequences, if folks continue to believe that we're the easy target and that we won't fight back, I think this is elevating the fact that more and more may happen. And that is my fear, is that some people may not already know that we're an easy target. And watching this and seeing this may give them the idea that these are things that they can do, right? And that we're just going to have to try to figure out as a community, how do we address this? I guess for me, it is a huge concern. I come into work now every day wondering if something's going to happen here at the office. And I think our community that we serve too come in thinking, this is Asian resources, right? We are a target. Our name is Asian Resources. They know that all of the immigrant Asians are coming into this center here. So what's not stopping somebody that blamed us for the virus, the pandemic, if they've lost a family member, if they've lost their job, right, to not blame us and come by here and shoot us up. But, my fear is that these are giving folks ideas of things that they can do out there. At the same time, it's also bringing awareness that Asians are a target, and we have been a target for the longest time now.
Thien, did you have some comments?
I would say this, and I think Assemblyman Cooper said it best, the fear is palatable, right? You can feel it, you can sense it. And I have a unique perspective in the sense that I am Asian American, I'm a refugee, but I'm also a prosecutor. So I know the legal standard it takes to prosecute these cases. And so I sort of have both perspectives on it. And we have to keep fighting. We have to keep fighting to make sure that we do everything we can to prevent these crimes from happening. But if they do happen, that there is a consequence for it. But the fear is definitely something that you can feel in the communities, in my own family, to be honest with you. We've had discussions about that, conversations about that. And so it is definitely real.
And
I want to talk about
one last thing. And I think for those of us that have young children, right, I've got a 6-year-old and I've got a 10-year-old, and she came home last year, right when this happened and the schools were closing. And she said that they told her she had the coronavirus, right? And you hear more and more stories about that, of little kids, Asian kids coming home to say that they were told that they had the coronavirus. And so I think we're going to see more of that, right? And now that kids are going back to school and schools are opening up a little bit more, that as parents, we worry what our kids are going to have to deal with when they go back to school.
Well, let's talk about taking the fight to it, right? Let's focus on the assembly and the legislature. What measures are currently being taken to address this issue? What steps do you hope to take in the near future?
So I authored a bill last year. It started last year, but it was introduced January of this year, AB 266. And just think about this. In California right now, present day, a hate crime is not considered a violent crime. I'll say it again. A hate crime is not considered a violent crime. That is mind-boggling. So if you burn a place of worship, a synagogue, a Buddhist temple, or you injure someone with great bodily injury, the California Penal Code does not consider that a violent crime, which is crazy. It's a hate crime. They've tried about, I think, 4 or 5 times to get it changed during the past 12 years and have been able to get it changed. And if it gets changed and it's considered a violent felony, all that happens is you're not eligible for early release. That's all. You're not eligible for early release. So think about that. Some of these folks will do a quarter of their time or half their time and get out. And that's what's frustrating for me as a legislator. I know the governor signed the bill and the legislature approved $1.4 million for better reporting, for crimes against the AAPI community. That's great. What are we going to do with that data? Number one, we know with that data, we know that hate crimes are on the increase. There are more incidents. So it's not going to tell us anything new that we don't know already. We'll get more numbers. And Tim said it best, accountability, consequences if you do this. And it has to change. And what's really disappointing is some of my colleagues are more worried about the perpetrators that commits these acts. They don't want them going to jail or doing any time. That's real talk. There are people here in the Capitol that don't want any bills that puts anybody in jail or prison at all, no matter what. So that's probably been the most disappointing thing and frustrating. I mean, it's just wrong. And to be Asian and to be worried about where you go or getting your shopping done early because you got to get home because you're worried about being out late or being out at the wrong time, that is not a way to live your life, not in this country. And so that's why I'm pushing it. Hopefully the bill gets heard. It may not get heard. And that's the unfortunate part about that. I've got my district is 26% API. I have the largest concentration of API constituents in the region, in the Sacramento area. It is important to them to push this bill. So we've got to push back and fight. It is a fight. And you've got to fight back. I think as Stephanie said it, growing up, hey, you always kept quiet and you flew under the radar. It can't be that way anymore. You've got to stand up and fight for yourself and not let these bullies take advantage. And it's just dead wrong. And I'll tell you, when I saw that elderly Chinese lady that got the black eye in San Francisco, that really hurt my heart. Who would do something like that? These are evil people doing evil things. If you do those type of crimes, you deserve to be punished, period.
Well, thank you for introducing the bill. Let's hope you get it through.
Hopefully I get a hearing. It may not get a hearing. That's the crazy part about it.
Well, I want to go back to what ARI is doing. Let's talk about what ARI is doing to currently protect and assist members of the AAPI community during this difficult time.
So we are working with our community and educating them the importance of being able to report these types of incidents. We're letting them know we are a safe place, that they can come to us if they are in need of any resources or services, if they want to remain anonymous, if they need our assistance in any way in getting to where they need to go, we'll connect them with the appropriate resources. We're doing everything in language for them. So if they are limited in the English language, we're able to translate or interpret for them. We're working directly with the Sheriff's Department and the Sacramento Police Department on finding ways that we can assist our community, whether it be the location of having a safe place to report and you don't have to call into the police department, but you can report it here to us. Or if it's a community in a location like Little Saigon and the businesses that are asking for more protection, asking for more police presence, right? So it's working with them on finding out what it is that they need at the moment or they want.
Right. Well, in addition to prosecuting cases at the DA's office, what is the office doing today to effectively, proactively address hate crimes?
Most definitely. So a couple of things. I know a couple of weeks ago, I was out there along with you as well, Rochelle, over at VinFat Market on Stockton Boulevard, partnering up with the Sacramento Police Department and the Sheriff's Department to talk to our elders and talk to our community members that were shopping there about hate crime and about reporting hate crime and what was happening in the community. We're also going to be out in a couple of weeks over at the Walton Center downtown doing this very same thing as well. In addition to that, we're going to create sort of a link on our website here, the Sacramento District Attorney's Office website, so that you can report a hate incident or a hate crime by sending in an email or putting in a phone call. So we're going to create another method for people to report. So these are some of the things that we're doing in terms of community outreach as well, which is as equally as important as prosecution.
So let's do this. Panel, what more do you think needs to be done as a community?
I think we need to continue to bring awareness and educate our community. Our community definitely needs more education. All the things that Thien talked about, I can guarantee you our API community are not aware of, and that they just don't know the difference, right? And so we just need to find a way to continue to educate them, continue to push them to be open, be loud, voice their concerns. I'm going with if you see something, say something, do something. We are not good at that. We see something and we turn away. We see something and we put our head down. And so for us, it's about you see something, say something, do something, right? And to the greater community, it's about unity. It shouldn't be because this is an API attack on the API community right now that it's their problem, not ours. It should be all of us coming together and solving this and working together and standing up for each other and fighting for each other. So if you see an Asian woman, a Latino woman, a Black woman that's getting beat up, you should go in there and you should assist that person. You should stand up for that person. Just because she is not the same as you are doesn't mean you let it go. I've seen too many videos of where there is somebody that is getting beaten up and everybody's just standing there and watching. And this is happening during broad daylight, and that needs to stop. Enough isn't enough. Enough is enough. An attack on one community is an attack on all of us.
And I agree with Stephanie 100% on that. You've got to be involved. You've got to be engaged. And that's what's going to make the difference. That's how we win. Standing there silently does not help us at all, does not help the victims in this. And just think about it. It could be your mom or your sister or your daughter or your father or your brother or your son. You won't want that happening to anyone. And the stronger we stand, it's like a binding sticks together, the stronger the weave is. And we've got to be engaged with that. And that's really what it comes down to, doing what's right. And love wins over hate every time. But this has been festering for a long time, and we've got to combat it head on and really deal with it. It's a test of our mettle.
One thing I'm fond about saying is, it's in a quote: "A rising tide lifts all ships." Right? A rising tide lifts all boats, and we need to rise together. We need to stop it. We need to speak out. We need to educate, and we also need to hold people accountable as well. So it's all of those pillars that is going to essentially stop this and help end this.
For the panel, where do you recommend members of the AAPI community and the community at large, where do you recommend they go for resources and services related to hate crimes and the reporting of hate crimes?
So they can go directly to the police department, the sheriff's department, the DA's office, but if they need a location where they feel that they want to become anonymous or they want to work with the community that they feel more comfortable with, they can definitely come to our office here, Asian Resources. We have 3 locations, and we have 3 locations so that way wherever you live, we have an office that's close to you. Our office staff speak, read, and write 20 different languages, and so we are able to cover any of the languages that folks are able to call in and need of. We can assist with reporting, we can assist with calling things in, we can assist with writing things, we can assist with any of those areas.
But I think we can all agree, though, that nothing can happen unless we do say something. If you see something, like Stephanie's saying, you got to say something. Jim?
I can't say any better than Stephanie. She nailed it on that.
Same here.
So I want to get to our closing message for our listeners, whether they're a member of the AAPI community or a part of the larger community, okay? What is your closing message? What is the message that you want everyone to hear about what's been going on, what they can do to make a difference, and what you're doing to make a difference?
We're going to get through this. We're going to change the narrative. And this podcast is a start to getting information out there and talking about it and having discussions about this and really making people more aware of it. So they're more involved, more engaged, and just turning the page on this. It's a dark stain in our history. It shouldn't be this way, but we've got to deal with it. The API community is very resilient. Look at the things they've gone through, even with Stephanie and Thien just coming to this country. It's been tough. So they have the mettle to resolve it and fight it. And we've got to unite as Californians, as Sacramentans, as Americans to get through this. And we'll be able to do that. So, thank you. This is a start.
I agree with Assemblymember Jim Cooper. I will say that we need to unite. It's not going to end. Enough is enough. And it's time that we all come together. And this is the perfect time for us to all come together and fight this. Again, one incident, one hate crime on one community is on all of us. And unless we come together and unless we fight this together, nothing's going to change. And when I say all together, I mean community, law enforcement, public safety, everybody, right? There's this divide and a push in certain communities that we don't want to have public safety involved or law enforcement involved, and we can't do that. That's continuing to silo and divide the community, and we can't do that. We have to find ways to work with each other.
Well said.
You know, Rochelle, in moments like this, I'm oftentimes reminded of what Nelson Mandela said, which is no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or because of their background or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human spirit and to the human heart.
Right. That's a wonderful place to end. Thank you very much for your words. Thank you all. And we hope this podcast provides insight and helpful information to help us prevent hate crimes against anyone in our community. So I want to thank my panel, and I want to thank our listeners. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.